All right, it is 7 o'clock Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Postcards to Swing States postcard update and frequently asked question event. First, just quickly, I am Reed McCollum. My pronouns are he, him. I am Program Outreach Director for Progressive Turnout Project. I'm originally from North Carolina, live outside of Chicago. My wife and two daughters celebrated a birthday today. Older daughter turned 12, but I founded Postcards to Swing States, and I've been our program outreach director at Progressive Turnout Project for a couple of years now. And before that, I had a career selling widgets for 15 years. And I love door-to-door canvassing. I've probably knocked 12,000 doors since 2017, and it is one of my favorite things to do. So I'm looking forward to be doing that later this fall. We have Sue, who is monitoring the chat, and we already have almost 800 people on the call, and we're expecting over 1,000 to join. So Sue's going to be doing her best to monitor the chat. She will answer some questions there, but please bear with us. Mostly, I'll share on the next slide sort of how you can contact us with questions that we'll answer after tonight's call. So this is the agenda. I'm going to provide an overview of Progressive Turnout Project and our Postcards to Swing States program. Have some really exciting updates that I'm excited to share about the progress towards the states that you can see in the image behind me where we're sending postcards. And also, I'm going to announce the House districts where we're going to be adding to our postcard program this year in just a couple weeks. And then the questions that I'll answer, the themes of those questions are around sort of the effectiveness, not only of postcards, but how postcard writing compares to other forms of voter contact, like door-to-door canvassing, phone banking, text messaging, how to think about the best use of your time. Also, just some basic tactical questions that we get a lot about sort of stamps, especially when you're trying to buy those before the prices go up, mailing dates, our messages, all sorts of stuff. So how do we have confidence that everything that we do, not just at Postcards to Swing States, but in the Democratic Progressive Movement, is effective? And then, we're going to end with sort of an exciting little short video we made, really for folks that maybe have never done door-to-door canvassing before. It's not for everybody, but there's so many grassroots groups out there that that might have members where that's an option. And so one of our goals is to make it easy for folks who have never done that before, but for whom it might be a good fit this fall to learn more about it. Okay, some quick housekeeping notes. I mentioned use the chat. Anytime you're using a chat, obviously be respectful. I mentioned that there's no ability to raise your hand. We won't be able to keep up with all the questions. Sue on our team is going to do a great job trying to stay on top of the chat as best as she can. If you have any issues with a postcard order, if you've placed an order for postcards and something went wrong or they haven't arrived yet and it's been weeks, this is what you should do: is email us after the call at postcards@turnoutpack.org. We will figure that out. So rather than trying to get that troubleshooted in the chat tonight, email us is the best way for us to respond and help get that sorted out. If you want to order postcards, maybe you don't know anything about us and you want to order them at the end of the call, or if you were referred by a friend, or if you want to make sure you have postcards before the debate next Thursday, we should be able to get them to you hopefully by then if you place an order right away. And then tonight is a YouTube stream, so it's being recorded. It will live on our YouTube page. That is the link to that YouTube page. And we will also send a follow-up email, but sometimes emails go to spam, so you'll be able to find this recording there. I will also link the slide deck to the notes, the description of this event after the event. So you'll be able to find these slides as a PDF document down the road. So feel free to just not take any notes and listen in. So I wanted to start with just why I am so optimistic. I got a chance to be a guest on a radio show up in Wisconsin, the Earl Ingram Show, yesterday. And, I realized when I was thinking about tonight's presentation, I didn't really have anything about just why I'm so optimistic about the outcome. I mean, I'm, I'd say a practitioner, political strategist at this point, and sort of wanted to share a little bit of why there's so much reason to be hopeful about the outcome of the election this fall. And if you listen to a lot of podcasts, you probably, if you listen to good ones, might have heard this before, but it is really true this year that the voters who will determine the outcome of this year's presidential election, and really all of the key elections, Senate races and House races, they're just not paying attention. More folks than ever before are intentionally avoiding political news. For a good reason. It's just it's a lot to follow it, and so many millions of folks will pay attention and really think about voting and making up their mind in the final month, if not weeks or days, and so there's so much work that we can do over the next 5 months, and polls don't vote. Especially when so many voters have not made up their minds. Our actions really, truly will determine the outcome. But also, I'm just optimistic about the entire campaign, all of the Democratic campaign's ability to sort of get the message out and connect with voters. This is the time to start doing that. And, if the polls are close to even right now, I think we're really in a great position to win the Senate, to hold, flip the House, hold the Senate, and reelect President Biden and Vice President Harris. So, you don't have to believe me because we've done that. So Democrats have literally won or overperformed in every single election cycle since the Orange Man came to power for the first time. We just cannot let it happen again, but we've done so well. So do not let the media narratives gaslight you into despair and giving up. The stakes could not be higher, but if we do the work, we're going to have the right outcome, and it's up to us. So that's my little optimistic pep talk. And so there's a rainbow, and it's also Pride Month. So all right, Progressive Turnout Project is the largest direct voter contact organization in the country. So we have the privilege to be a partner with organizations like Biden for President, the campaign, the DNC, the DCCC, the DSCC, all of the Democratic organizations that are making sure that campaigns are coordinated and run across the country. Our mission is mobilization. So our focus at Progressive Turnout Project is reaching out and connecting to folks that, if they vote, are extremely likely to vote for Democrats. We were founded out of frustration that so much money gets spent on TV and not enough having actual conversations directly reaching out to voters. And as an organization, we're going to invest over $30 million this year. So I'll briefly touch on sort of our programs and then focus in on postcards and updates. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but we have a flexible paid door-to-door canvassing program that will be running this fall in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. It's a great program. It's a contractor-based model where folks can make $125 for every canvas list. It takes about 3 hours. So those are the 6 sort of vital swing states that we have to win. And that's a multi-million-dollar investment to do that. Campaign Fellows is a program that puts a paid campaign staffer who knocks doors and organizes volunteers on key federal, but also state ledge and state Senate campaigns in many states across the country, the competitive campaigns where a lot of times there may not be anybody paid to help get out the vote and knock doors. We do a paid relational organizing program that in cities and swing states reaches out to folks that are not necessarily closely engaged in politics, but then pays them to reach out to as a trusted messenger to their friends and family and acquaintances who would likely vote for Democrats, to break through sort of just that, it's so hard to reach folks anymore. And then we'll talk about postcards. So these are sort of the suite of programs at Progressive Turnout Project that are core to our strategy of winning and mobilizing Democrats. All right, we have 1,300 people on the call tonight, so that is just, I'm blown away. Thank you all so much for spending your Tuesday evening here. So how it started in my kitchen in the suburbs of Illinois as a volunteer project in my garage, in the garage of my co-founder, who's a hand and wrist surgeon, and she lives in Michigan now and was instrumental in helping us get the program off the ground with a lot of volunteers in the neighborhood who are many of whom still help volunteer with packing postcards for us. So 2020, we had over 100,000 folks write 21 million postcards. I was a volunteer, everybody was a volunteer, but we got some funding from Progressive Turnout Project. We became part of Progressive Turnout Project at the beginning of 2021. How it's going now is we've had volunteers across the country write over 52 million postcards since 2020. So this is our current warehouse. We have one location. It's staffed by volunteers and a few team members that pack up shipments of postcards. That bottom photo is about 3 million postcards. So that gives you some perspective of the huge collective action that we're all part of this year. It's more handwritten messages to voters than any other organization by far. Because we provide free postcards. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to have the maximum impact that you can have. So we mail you free postcards along with already printed voter lists and instructions. So you don't have to print anything at home. Your commitment is really the postage. We'll talk more about stamps later, but also just the time to write the postcards and to recruit friends and family to help you. We also like to give people a lot of time to write postcards because it's such a great activity when it's 110 degrees in Arizona or in the evening or when you're watching the debate or when you just have, 5 minutes a day when you're making dinner to do your daily bit of activism. Not everybody has 5 hours on a weekend where they can get out there or travel to a swing state. So it's the most accessible way to make a difference, and it really does. All right, the program that's up and running now is to send postcards to these 11 states. And these are presidential battleground states, swing states, and then the key Senate race states across the country. So we have key Senate races in Montana with John Testard, Sherrod Brown in Ohio. We're also writing postcards for the Senate races in Texas and for Florida. And then the other states are just vital battlegrounds, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina. These are the postcard designs that you can see right behind me. So these are the free postcards that we send. And this is the progress. So this is how far we are towards the goal of sending 2 postcards to every single likely Democratic voting household in each of these states. I'll talk about the mailing and the research that goes into when those 2 waves of postcards will be sent. So we're doing just one wave to start, at least for Texas and Florida, but for the other states here, you can see Montana. We've already finished 2 waves of postcards to Montana. It's a fairly small state in terms of its population. So don't feel like you need to agonize or memorize this if you sign up for more postcards. There's an option when you sign up to select where most needed. And that gives us a ton of buffer to make sure that we can make sure that states that like Ohio, which is lagging a little bit behind, get caught up. All right, in terms of the House races, so I'm really excited to announce that you all are the first folks to learn this. We are adding all 56 of these House races to our postcard program starting on July 9th. Now, these are all House races in states that are not already receiving postcards. So there are absolutely key competitive congressional races in states like Arizona, Michigan, North Carolina, Georgia, but every voter in those states is already getting postcards no matter where they live. So we are adding House districts that are in other states, California, Illinois, New York. You can read them on here. There's sort of many states on this list. The message options and the postcard designs are still the same. So for all of the House districts, it's a postcard design. Let me flip back to it so you can actually see it. It's this bottom right, America Votes. So that is our House district postcard that you'll get if you sign up specifically for any of those House districts. And when you sign up for the House program, you will get to pick from a drop down which district you want to write for. You'll also be able to sort of say wherever it's most needed, and then we'll assign you one of these districts. So that'll be how that works. it will be a separate order form, but you will also find it from our turnoutpack.org/postcards website, and in emails will have a link that goes straight to that order form. So it's a separate actual order form from the one that we have for the statewide program. So there will be two places that you can order postcards um, starting July 9th. And when you add up the 11 states plus the 26 million postcards, or sorry, plus the House districts, it totals 26 million postcards. And the reason that this fun little graphic is pointing towards 5 tractor trailers is that is literally the space that the 26 million postcards takes up. It is 5 tractor trailers full of postcards. And if you saw my teaser on social media about whether the postcards would fill up an Olympic-sized swimming pool, the answer is it depends on if there's a deep end and if we're stacking postcards. But they would take up exactly 5 tractor trailers. So we're going to start talking about some of the questions that come up, and this is where a lot of the meat and potatoes is for the presentation tonight. So this is a little word cloud in terms of how common these themes are in terms of the questions that we get from our volunteers all over the country. So we get questions about stamps, the best use of your time, or is writing postcards a good use of your time? You know, the stakes are so high, you have a limited amount of time, what should you be doing? Mailing dates, you know, how do we land on those? Are they too late? Why don't we send them earlier? The message options, you know, that's a big one in terms of the 3 message options that we give you on the instructions. And then just really how effective are postcards, but also I get frustrated that we as a progressive data club of geeks don't necessarily share out to volunteers. They're so important in the grassroots. How we know what works in general about all forms of mobilizing the key voters, to inform you, to give you more confidence in what we know, and to help expose areas where we don't know as much and need more research to close a lot of holes in terms of our knowledge. So we'll start with stamps because it's tactical and very straightforward. So postcard stamps right now, if you go to the post office and buy stamps, a postcard stamp costs 53 cents. The last day that you can buy postcard stamps for 53 cents is July 3rd, July 13th. On July 14th, postcard stamps go up 3 cents to 56 cents. A normal postcard stamp says postcard on it. It does not have a cash value on it. It just says postcard. Those barns or seashells or flags hold their value forever. They are the same as forever stamps in that you can use them 5 years from now. If it says postcard on it, it is valid to mail a postcard in the United States forever. Now, if you go to the post office and it's closed and there's a kiosk that sells stamps, I would avoid it because it will sell you a ugly looking thing that says 53 cents on it, which is not a postcard stamp, and will not be enough to mail a postcard after July 13th. The easiest way to buy postcards is really just USPS.com from the Postal Service website. The actual post offices hold a limited value of stamps. They may or may not have enough, but feel free to buy them from your local post office. The thing you don't want to do though is buy them from any website that claims to have a discount on postcard stamps, claiming some sort of bulk discount. Those are counterfeit. They are not legitimate. If you are seeing something that says you can get 20% off postcard stamps or forever stamps, it is a scam. I didn't put a link in here because it's a slide, but just Google counterfeit stamps and you will find articles. They're becoming more and more prevalent, these scams. And if you have potentially already bought counterfeit stamps, proceed with caution. It is possible that they will still deliver your postcard or your mail rather than you being out hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but definitely you don't want to go buy counterfeit stamps. So, all right, what do we know about the effectiveness? And I'm going to go real broad here before we hone in on postcards because the context is really so important. to know what's effective, we have to measure what works. And we are not a siloed organization trying to figure that out in the darkness by ourselves with handwritten postcards. There is a wealth of knowledge. Really, for 15 to 20 years, there have been organizations that have done rigorous statistical, randomized controlled experiments to measure the effectiveness of direct voter contact. We know a lot about mobilization, boosting turnout, because the outcome of whether somebody voted or not is something we can directly look at in the voter file. So it is straightforward to create a control group of people that don't receive things like postcards, and then a treatment group of people that do in large numbers, and then compare the statistical, basically compare what percentage of the control group voted, what percentage of the treatment group voted, and then you can measure the impact of your intervention, which is sending postcards in our case, but it can be for door-to-door canvassing, sending text messages. And the organization called the Analyst Institute is really for folks that work in politics, that understand political data. It is the organization that we all turn to, that is both the clearinghouse for almost all of the scientific, statistically rigorous experimentation in terms of direct voter contact, but also an organization that puts together meta-analyses, best practice guides, that campaign professionals and strategists at organizations across the country on the left rely on. It's a members-only organization, so that Republicans can't just immediately find out what's effective. It's free to join, but you have to have an email that is a political or progressive nonprofit organization. So you cannot join it with your Gmail. And those of us who are members are not able to share directly their guides. But I want you to know that it exists. And it has been a wealth of knowledge. It's a clearinghouse of data, and it's so powerful. So our starting point is following what the Analyst Institute recommendations are. We've published our research there. We read all of the research of other organizations. And so I want you to know that that's a thing that exists. So, and then there's also a great book that's on its fifth edition called Get Out the Vote by Professors Donald Green and Alan Gerber, who were the first academics to do rigorous statistical experiments measuring direct voter contact, working with campaigns that would help share data and set up experiments for them. One quote from the latest edition is their meta-analysis of 15 public-facing studies suggests that handwritten postcards generate an average of 1 vote every 71 postcards. It's about 3 times as effective as conventional get out the vote mail. So they actually cite our large postcard experiment from the midterms in their 5th edition. So that was exciting. But that's a book that you can buy, and I recommend reading it if you're really interested in learning more about direct voter contact, messaging frameworks like social pressure, how different modes of reaching voters like door-to-door canvassing, phone banking, mail compare to one another. That's one of the first books that I read in what was the 3rd edition at the time, back in 2017. So what works to boost turnout? This is probably the key slide, because what I'm going to do is essentially summarize the lessons that both Get Out the Vote and the Analyst Institute share from 15 to 20 years of rigorous data and meta-analysis and best practices and seminars and conventions. Messages that focus on voting rather than candidates, political parties, or issues, for mobilizing voters, for boosting turnout. Messages that focused on voting are the most effective tactic to boost turnout. Doesn't mean that you can't craft a message that talks about issues to boost turnout. You can. It doesn't mean that we should never communicate about candidates to voters. Of course we should. But in the strategy of how we win elections, the phase that's called Get Out the Vote at the end is when programs like our postcard program are most effective if they focus on messages that talk about voting. Of those message frameworks that talk about voting, one called social pressure is overwhelmingly and really always the most effective. It's been measured hundreds of times in every context, recently, in the past, on handwritten postcards, other forms of mail, door-to-door canvassing. Social pressure in general emphasizes that voting is a positive thing. So as citizens, many of us feel like, oh, we want to fit in, be part of the group. It's actually our tribal psychology is to want to be part of the in group, to do what's expected of us, and to emphasize the social norm that voting is a good thing. Like, thank you for doing that, is a form of social pressure. So it's not shaming. It's not threatening people. It's really just sort of saying, like, as humans, we want to do what's good, and voting is good. And taking something that might be a very private act and being like, no, it's a public thing. Like, we're all in this together. And who you vote for is totally private. So feel good about it, and it's the most effective framework. It's not the only effective framework. I'll talk about others. And then in terms of modes, and by mode, I mean things like mail, phone calls, knocking doors, sending text messages. They all have their pros and cons. There's not one tactic to reach voters that's quote unquote better. There's concepts like, can you scale it up, and is it cost effective? Will it reach really voters that are hard to reach in a different way? And there are many folks that live in areas where we just cannot talk to them at their doors. They live in apartments, nursing homes, extremely rural areas. They don't feel comfortable answering the door. They work during schedules where we're not knocking doors. They work the night shift. They're asleep during the day. Very few people answer the phone anymore. Text messages can reach a lot of people. Mail can reach everybody, but it's not a face-to-face conversation. So rather than obsessing about which mode, I like to think about it in terms of the hours of activism that you can put in, and that makes all the difference. But I'll circle back to this and talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of these different modes and what we know from the data later on. Timing matters. When we're reaching voters is really important. For a Get Out the Vote program, it's only really effective when people can take action. Taking action can be requesting a mail ballot in many states, not everywhere. Taking action can be early in-person voting. In a state like New Hampshire, where it's pretty much the only time to vote is on election day, that's a much shorter window for when Get Out the Vote is really effective. All of the voter contact that we do has a decay effect, meaning if we talk to somebody in April, it's less effective than it would be late October or just a few days before election day if they haven't voted yet. That's just a reality that has a concept in the data called GOTV decay, or Get Out the Vote decay. So that's an important concept in terms of the timing of voter contact. There's never a bad time to reach out to voters. There are very important strategic things that we can be doing right now. Voter registration, deep canvassing, staying in touch, community-based organizations reaching out. Like, it is often way too late if we only show up in the final weeks before the election. And making sure that your friends and family and your neighbors know what Democrats have been doing this whole time while they've been ignoring politics, and how they're going to be the ones that bring cost of living down is so essential and important. But having them then act on all of that information and voting is really essential in the final month before the election. As an organization, we as Postcards to Swing States have done many large, extremely large, rigorous randomized controlled experiments. We've done the most and the largest experiments on postcards by far. We've tested 15 postcard messages in large experiments. We've measured postcards to boost turnout by up to 1.3 percentage points. To put that number into context, if our postcards boosted turnout by 1.3 percentage points this year, that would add 183,300 additional votes. That might seem like a lot of votes, but that is 4 times as many votes as determined the presidential election in favor of Joe Biden in 2020. So that's a big number. Our elections in this country are often very close. Adding 183,000 votes would be tremendous. I don't know that our postcards will add that many. The electoral environment is the biggest factor in terms of how effective anything that we do is. So when you see organizations highlight really large numbers in terms of the effect of their program, be aware that it is much easier to boost turnout enormously in a special election, in a primary election, or even in a midterm election than in a presidential election. So that election environment is the biggest driver in terms of how effective anything that we do is. It's much more it's a bigger factor than the message, and the message is a bigger factor than the mode. So whether it's postcards versus letters or phone calls, the electoral environment and then the script and sort of the setup of the program are really huge drivers in terms of the effectiveness of that program. You can write postcards and write something on them that could actually suppress turnout. And if you write with an organization that follows the data, then you know that what you're doing is adding value. We've won 3 Analyst Institute XP Awards and collaborated with messaging experts like Anant Shankar-Sorio. And we publish everything that we've done. It's all on our website as well. You don't have to be a member of the Analyst Institute to read our results. They're on our postcard program FAQ page as well. The instructions that we provide this year are the 3 message options that we are confident are the most effective things you can write on a postcard. And I'm confident that our program is the most effective way that you can boost Democratic turnout without leaving your house. I truly am. We've done so much experimentation to prove that over the years. The first message option that we provide on the instructions is social pressure. It is measured to be 50% more effective than our other 2 message options, which we believe are the second and third most effective messages that you can write on a postcard. So that first message option is 50% more effective. The Analyst Institute recommends social pressure. Get Out the Vote says that social pressure is the most effective messaging framework. I've seen measurements of social pressure might be twice as effective as non-social pressure messages, but that's averaging out all of the other messages that folks write. Thank you for being a voter is how all of our postcards start. And that is actually social pressure, but it's just thanking them. And it reinforces that idea that voting is a good thing and that it's a civic thing that's public. And who you vote for is private, whether you vote is public record. Please vote in Tuesday, November 5th. It's a very short message. The most effective thing you can put on a postcard to boost turnout. The second and third message options are based on our really large midterm experiment, pretty much identical in terms of their effectiveness to one another. So if you don't want to write the first message, which is totally fine, don't agonize about whether you write the second or the third. They're measured about the same. So, reminding friends and family, and then just prompting voters to think about when they're going to vote in the election, getting them to stop and just think about that is proven to be effective as well. So all of these messages are about voting. They don't talk about candidates. They don't talk about saving democracy. They don't talk about President Biden, not because we have any restrictions legally. We can say whatever we want on postcards. These are the most effective options. All right, bear with me on this graphic. So I'm going to talk about when we mail postcards. And this is not state specific as a general thing. This is my attempt I'll walk you through this graphic or this infographic. So this top blue bar, the light shade blue bar, think of that as for a particular state when a voter can request a mail ballot. So this would be obviously for a state where you can request a mail ballot without an excuse. So that's usually a fairly long window. Again, this is a generic example, but think of that as a long window for when you can request a mail ballot. The darker blue bar below that, it's labeled when you can vote early in person. So that usually, starts after the beginning of when you can request a mail ballot, and it goes sometimes right up until election day. In some states, there's a gap of a few days, but again, and then it always ends with election day. Every state, November 5th is election day. So for our program, we're sending 2 postcards for all the states except for Florida and Texas. The second mailing wave. So if you're writing with us, you're not responsible for 2 mailing waves. You got one set of instructions. You're just writing part of one of these mailing waves. Excuse me. The second mailing wave for every state is October 24th, which is plenty of time for those postcards to arrive before election day, because that postcard's goal is to boost turnout on election day. So the ideal day for it to arrive would frankly be like the Friday before election day. We rigorously follow how long first class mail takes to deliver across the country. And like 98% of first-class mail, including postcards, deliver within 8 to 9 days, and that would mean that almost all of it's delivered in time for election day. The reason that we don't move that mailing date up even earlier, just to guarantee that mail that gets lost or left behind doesn't arrive after election day, is it would make the program overall far less effective. So, a very, very tiny percentage of the postcards might arrive late, usually because they become missorted or something like that. But overall, that's the best time to mail the postcards. We are well aware of the issues going on at the Postal Service and delays in mail carriers, and all of the mail goes to sorting facilities that are automated. So that those delays are frankly really built into that buffer that we already have in the program. So otherwise we would mail them several days later. So this anticipates delays in mail. The first mailing wave, and this is why I have this graphic here, the ideal time to send that first postcard is when voters have still two options. We want the postcard to arrive ideally when early voting has either just begun in person or it's about to begin. If it arrives earlier than when they can go and vote in person in a state where there is widespread early voting, it's just far less effective. So, not every state gives us this flexibility, but the ideal time would be when a voter receives that first postcard, they can go vote early. Early voting has started, but there is still time for them to request a mail ballot if that's the preferred way for them to vote. So, if we had to pick, if it's too late to request a mail ballot, then early in-person voting is overwhelmingly the best option in most states. So this isn't one size fits all, but this helps explain why when you look at our first mailing, if you're writing to Pennsylvania, it's got an October 11th mailing date. For Wisconsin and Michigan, it's the 17th. And then for all of the other states, Arizona, Georgia, Montana, North Carolina, Nevada, and Ohio, it's the 15th of October. If we were to do some third mailing wave, what I would have done in states that have flexible vote by mail rules is send it a little bit earlier. But the other issue with going too early is that voters just know that the election isn't coming up. They've got a lot of time. They get a postcard. They're like, I got 6 weeks before the election. And they just recycle it and they don't even think about it. So, you'd say, well, that's why we send it, but it just doesn't prompt action nearly as effectively. And that's proved in data that if you start, Pennsylvania's you can request mail ballots, I don't know, maybe August. They start getting mailed in September, like late September. But if you're mailing postcards to folks in September to get out the vote and prompt them to request mail ballots, they're just not going to be that effective. You'd want to wait until the salience of the election is sort of higher in people's minds. So it's counterintuitive because you think I want to get people as long as possible, but that's not happening. They're looking at the postcard for 15 seconds and it's going in the trash. Maybe it'll sit on their kitchen counter for a few days, but then it goes in the trash. So it is not performing its task to remind them for a month. It just isn't. So you don't want to send it too early. All right, more meat here. The best use of your time. So I mentioned this, gave away kind of the spoiler that I'm convinced that the most effective thing that you can do is think about which different modes and programs allow you to maximize your total hours of how much you can put into saving democracy and electing Democrats between now and November 5th. And that often doesn't mean just picking one thing. For some folks, it means picking one thing. But if you can write a lot of postcards, I think of postcards as like if postcards can fill like all the gaps in your time, it's just write postcards until you can't do it anymore. But if you are able to do other things like virtual phone banks from home are great. If you haven't done door-to-door canvassing, I'm gonna play that recruitment video at the end of the call. There's a lot of ways that you can be active, but especially if you're like thinking about, well, I do want to do whatever I can. What is the most impactful thing? Is you don't have to just pick one thing. It's sort of the total number of hours that you can put into it. As long as you are following programs that are publishing their data, that do rigorous work, that know what they're doing is effective based on having measured it and following best practices. Organizations are talking about the Analyst Institute, Get Out the Vote, If some of those slides that I shared earlier match kind of what a program is guiding you to do, then that's a good thing. Again, for mobilization and get out the vote. You know, so direct voter contact is the most effective closer to election day. You know, one of the things that's great about our postcard program is that you can be writing postcards in May and June, July, and August, but the effect of them is during that critical time frame close to the election. You are obviously dropping them in the mail in October, so you're sort of stockpiling hours of activism and then releasing that. So it's like a battery. A shoebox full of postcards is like a battery of voter contact that you can then release and you know, drain that battery to help elect Democrats when they can do the most to do that. So you know, the same concept, frankly, is true if you're thinking about knocking doors. If you can knock doors like 3 times, and that's all you can do, the most effective 3 days to knock doors would be in the last like week before election day. If you can knock doors 60 times, then you cannot knock 60 shifts of doors in 3 days. So, you know, you kind of get the concept is like there's a lot of important door knocking that can be happening now. If people are able to get out there and do canvassing now, you know, registering voters, doing deep canvassing, persuasion, really listening to voters is what folks are doing there. Because if we started to have conversations in June about, have you thought about whether you're going to vote earlier on election day, that just would have no effect. So there are important tactics and things that you can do through every mode early. But in terms of if you just had like one thing that you could do and there was one day, you'd want that day to be as close to the election as possible. So it's sort of yin and yang here with my last advice, which was to do as many hours as possible. It doesn't mean you don't like get off the hook by like, oh, it's like, well, I'll just, you know, volunteer on election day. It's like, that's great if you can only volunteer one day, but you want to maximize as many hours of activism as possible. I said this before, but the message and the timing matter more than the mode. So what you were saying to voters and how are you communicating it is more effective than whether it's showing up in a letter in an envelope or on a postcard or you know, in a phone call. So you know, knocking doors, phone calls, postcards are all part of a winning strategy. You know, we want to be able to, it's harder and harder to really connect with voters. So, you know, the magic of door-to-door canvassing is that when you have a face-to-face conversation with somebody, nothing is more effective than a face-to-face conversation. But when you knock doors, you know, it's maybe 15% of the time, does the person that you're trying to contact both answer the door and end up having a conversation with them. So that is what's called just like a scalability challenge. It's really hard to fully exhaust all of the door knocking opportunities that you would want. And so that's one reason that you hear so many campaigns asking folks to knock doors is that we just can't saturate door knocking. Whereas TV ads, if you live in a key swing state, like by the week before the election, when you turn on the TV or YouTube or, you know, see digital ads on your phone, like it's just overwhelmingly saturated with the ads for the election. So, all right, I hope there's sound here. I have to click over to play this.
In a world that seems peaceful and quiet, you will face your darkest fears. Whatever you do, don't look behind you.
Oh, it's just the mailman.
In a town where something isn't quite right. When you're all alone.
You know this is concrete, right?
Things will never be.
Come on, I'm just knocking doors. It's not that scary.
Well, it's a little scary.
Sure, I was nervous at first, but now I got this.
But
we'll show you how it's done.
We've been volunteering for 15 years. Talking to voters is how we win. talking to people and getting fresh air feels great.
The training took, what, 30 minutes? And then we were ready to go. You'll get a script and whatever materials you need.
You'll keep track of everything on an app on your phone, and it's really easy to use. You'll go to specific homes on a list where we know that most voters are Democrats, but they may need a nudge to actually go vote.
So many elections come down to just a few votes. Just asking them if they've made a plan is so important. It really does make them more likely to vote.
A lot of potential voters need that personal connection to get past all the noise and negativity.
Most folks are just busy and don't follow politics every day. Showing up and getting to think about voting is sometimes all that it takes.
An older woman told me that she was going to vote because I showed up at her door. No one ever knocked her door before.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people are kind of scared or intimidated by it, but it's way easier than I thought. You don't need to be a policy expert or anything. It's just about making sure Democrats know when they plan to vote and giving them the right info.
And if you do run into a Republican, they're usually nice and just tell you. And that data helps us know who's who, and then you don't have to go back to that house.
I don't want to wake up the day after the election and wish I did more.
I never thought I'd knock doors, but I ask myself, am I doing everything I can to fight for my values?
Following the polls just makes you feel helpless. The polls don't vote. It's what we do that matters.
Because I know that every time that I get out to knock doors, we get a few more votes, and it really adds up.
If I'm concerned about what's going on, if I really believe that democracy is under attack, I need to step up. So I did.
I signed up. Come join us.
We said yes.
Knocking doors is one of the most important things I've ever done.
Join us.
All right, we're not done, but you know, a friend of mine, Jackie in Charlotte, told me that she has deep canvassing events launched out of her house in one room, and postcard parties happening in the other room, and that really gave me the courage to share a video like this, you know, on a call about writing postcards, because hopefully, you know, you guys really understand that. I'm not somebody, we're not an organization that's going to shame people that are writing postcards for not going out there and knocking doors. Like, it's, you know, I sort of set this up with the total number of hours of activism that you can put in. So, you know, I'm going to share like all the asks right now, but, you know, I think sort of every day about, you know, the stakes and how much work it really does. It takes a lot of work to boost turnout in a presidential election. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I think my best estimate is if you write 200 postcards, you've added 1 vote. And because elections are so close in this election, you know, I mentioned 26 million postcards is going to add, you know, 3 to 4 times as many votes as decided the last presidential election. So those 5 tractor trailers full of postcards could be the difference between democracy and authoritarianism. But it's just not the case then in a presidential election. If you write 30 postcards, you've added 3 additional votes. You know, and I'll give you a little bit about the why is, you know, about half the people that are receiving your postcards are going to vote anyway. We don't know who's going to vote. And so it's great in a presidential election when turnout's really high and we target people that are not certain to vote. You know, they're not reliable voters necessarily, but a lot of them are going to vote. So about half of your postcards are just going to go to people where there's nothing a postcard can do if it's arriving at the household of somebody that will vote no matter what. It doesn't mean they've already voted. It just means that based on doing good statistics, they would have voted anyway by the time that all is said and done without your postcard. So amongst the other folks, it's like, you know, 100 people get a postcard when they're getting tons of other political mail, phone calls, text messages. It is pretty spectacular, I think, that that mail where you're putting you know, your time into handwriting it with our colorful postcards designs can really boost turnout in such a noisy environment where people are, you know, aware that there's an election coming up. You know, so that's why we measure what's effective, is that it has to work. We need to make sure that it's working. If you go out on a canvassing shift and you're knocking doors, you know, on an average shift, you might talk to 14 people. So if you talk to those 14 people in the fall, you've added 1 vote. So that's a good trade-off in terms of thinking about it. Is a door-to-door canvassing shift, maybe 3 hours, you add a vote. You write postcards, you write 200 postcards, you're adding your 1 vote in these key crucial swing states. So if you do several phone bank shifts, you're going to add votes. So it's like add as many votes as you can, but it does take just a huge amount of effort to move the needle. And what's exciting is that like none of this is reflected in the polls. All of the work that we're all putting in is going to be determinative, and it's really important. So, postcards, feel really good about your contribution and what you're doing. If you haven't done door-to-door canvassing before, but you theoretically would be able to do that if you live in a swing state or near a swing state, or to be totally honest, if you're willing to go to a swing state for a few days or a week close to the election, this video is really for you, because I think a lot of people don't go knock doors because they think about having to persuade Trump voters or get into arguments, or you have to be a policy expert or be really, really persuasive and good at having conversations. And you don't have to be. It's as the video showed, you're just basically asking them, have they made a plan to vote? That's that plan making tactic that we talked about. Hey, I can see from voter rolls that you're an active voter. Like, thank you so much for being a voter. And that's the same message that's on our postcards in terms of that. So, just basically talking to people about that and recording that data, especially in the fall, is a game changer. The reason I mentioned going to swing state is that we have a program that pays folks to knock doors, and it can basically, at $125 for every list, and you can do 2 a day. You can pay to go to a swing state, stay at a hotel, rent a car, and actually still, eat out and not come back any the poorer for it in terms of doing that. So not everybody has the flexibility in terms of childcare, work. I totally get it. But if we don't make big asks, then you don't hit any pitches you don't swing at. I think coming from somebody that's founded a program that's had volunteers write like 52 million postcards, that I'm thrilled it's still effective to write postcards. So things that you can do right now. We have had volunteers, and then we'll wrap up. We have had volunteers order already 9.5 million postcards. We're like 37% of the way to our goal of 26 million postcards. All of those House districts, all of these swing states are just so important. So please, please, please tell your friends, tell your family to sign up and join our movement of what'll be 250,000 people roughly writing postcards to save democracy this year. If you can write more postcards, order more postcards, please do that. I know stamps become really expensive, and I think it's almost always the stamps that prevent you from writing as many postcards as you'd love to write with us. But doesn't mean you can't go out and recruit other people that are like-minded that would like to be part of this. If you would like to learn more about the door-to-door canvassing program that we have in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, go to turnoutpack.org/doors. The program signups for that program start at the end of August. We'll have folks out on the doors in September in those 6 states. It's a really cool program. We actually focus on towns and rural parts of the state that might just not get knocked otherwise. And if you're somebody that is interested in going into a swing state, shoot us an email. You'll find you can fill out a form at that website. I'd love to talk to you more about that. The video that I shared about door knocking is easy, effective, and fun is also on our YouTube channel. So I throw the YouTube channel there at the bottom. That is where the recording for this call tonight and the slides that I shared will all be. And again, we can do this. Feeling really optimistic. Think about how you can put in as much time into getting out the vote as possible between now and November 5th. And, on behalf of everybody at Progressive Turnout Project, just thank you all so much for all of your activism. And we'll see you soon.